Hi everyone, my name is Brian Rinaldi, and I'm here to talk to you about 3 productivity tips for the Jamstack. So some of you may be thinking to yourself, well, what the heck is the Jamstack anyway? I'm going to give you a brief overview. So the Jamstack is more of a methodology or architecture than is a real stack. It emphasizes static first. So that means you pre-render most of the pages and content of your site. That's using a static site generator to take things like Markdown and templates and API calls and pull all that together into to generate static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that is pushed up to a CDN. But that doesn't mean it has to be static. You can leverage APIs both at build time and at runtime to have that dynamic content and interaction. So you can still have things like authentication and search and all the things you'd expect from a modern application. You can still get that from a Jamstack application. I do want to leave you with some resources, though, so you can learn more about Jamstack, because that's a really, really quick overview. Let me go through a few of those. First of all is jamstack.org. This is actually run by netlify, who came up with the term Jamstack in the first place. And it covers a lot of like why you'd want to use Jamstack, what Jamstack's all about, a glossary of terms. It gives you like links to headless CMSs and static site generators, and helps you filter through and choose the tools you want to use. There's also links to the community. There's a great community Slack that they run where you can meet other members of the Jamstack community. So if you have further questions, you can ask them. This article by Snipcart, everything you need to know to get started with the Jamstack, is a really good place to start as well. They update this every year to make sure it's up to date. Of course, I'm going to recommend that you check out the Jamstack book, which I am co-writing with my friend Raymond Camden. We've got most of the book out via Manning Early Access Program, so you can get a copy right now, and most of the chapters are already there. We try and give a good overview of all the tools and approaches that you can take to building sites with the Jamstack, with some common examples of like things like documentation sites, e-commerce sites, and so on. Now that we've kind of gotten what the Jamstack is out of the way, I just want to kind of introduce myself, since I didn't. I'm a developer advocate at StepZen. I also created a site named cfe.dev. This is a great resource if you're looking for educational stuff for developers. We cover a variety of topics. So there's lots of live meetups and video recordings on a variety of educational topics. So please check that out. As I mentioned, I'm co-author of the Jamstack book, and I've been doing Jamstack stuff since 2013, which is in Jamstack time, very, very long time. As I mentioned, I work at StepZen. If you're interested in Jamstack, we're building a great tool that will be really useful for you. It allows you to pull in multiple data sources like MySQL databases, Postgres databases, REST APIs, and pull all of those together into a single consolidated GraphQL API. This is really, really useful for both Jamstack apps and really any application. You can see the URL to request an invite there, so please do. Now, enough about me. Let's get to my tips. My first tip is going to be netlify dev. So netlify dev is a tool that's built into the netlify CLI. And it really, really speeds up my productivity when I'm building Jamstack applications. Now, obviously this is going to only work with netlify, but there are a lot of other options, like you have Vercel, you have Azure Static Web Apps, you have Cloudflare Pages. The list goes on. There's a lot of competition now in your options to deploy your Jamstack applications. I've used netlify for years, so that's why I'm going to be talking about netlify dev. At its core, it really just is a way of launching your application and testing it locally. So instead of, say, if I was using Hugo, instead of doing Hugo serve, I would do netlify dev. But it does a lot more than just replace your command for launching. So let me show you one example here. This is my cfe.dev site. It's built with Hugo. So first of all, you'll see that I have a command here. I've created a netlify toml, and I've changed the build command for netlify dev. So by default, netlify dev will figure out what kind of static site generator I'm using, and it will automatically launch it for me, which is really, really great. But again, I've only then just replaced one command with another. But in this case, I need to use a special flag to build this site, the -- build future, which says that I actually want it to build pages that are future dated, which is great for like an event site like mine. But I don't. Instead of having to type Hugo serve -- build future every time, I still only do netlify dev. Now that already is helping me, but then it does a number of other things that are really important. So let me show you this. First, I'm going to go into my project, and then I'm going to run netlify dev, and you'll see in a moment it's going to launch my site running locally. Okay, there's my site running locally, but that's really cool. Again, it used that Hugo serve -- build future so that you see pages that are future dated. Great, but what else did it do? As you can see here, it injected a bunch of environment variables. These are all to run Algolia, which runs my search in this particular instance. And those environment variables actually live on my netlify site. So instead of having to maintain the environment variables in netlify and then my environment variables in a local .env file, I'm able to actually just have those env variables injected into my application and available to my application when it builds and when it runs. So that is hugely useful. It gives you one place to maintain all of that stuff. But it's also doing something else. This site actually runs with a number of different functions. Netlify functions are basically like serverless functions, and we'll talk a little bit more about this and how you can deploy them with your application and things like that. But it runs a function server here that's listening on a different port. This allows me to test my site locally and test my functions locally and have the two communicate with each other as if it was running live on netlify. Let me show you another quick example. Okay, this site is very, very simple. It's really a demo showing how I can pull MySQL data into a Hugo site. But what it's doing here, first of all, again, it's injecting all of these build settings pulled from netlify here, and I don't have any functions on this one, but I'm going to actually open up the code for this here. Okay, what I've done is I've customized using netlify toml. I've told it instead of running Hugo serve, run npm run dev, and then I can use my package.json to do a little bit more. In this case, what I'm doing is I say I want to run node, and I run this script here, and then do Hugo serve. So that script is going to pull content from an external MySQL database, write it out to the way Hugo expects to get it, and then run Hugo serve. But I'm able to kind of wrap all that up very simply so that all I have to do is run netlify dev, because I can customize the command that it runs. And because it does a lot of the work ahead of time. This script actually depends on the environment variables that it pulls down from netlify. So again, you get all of these things built in just when you run netlify dev. It's gonna run a command that I can specify. It's gonna pull environment variables from netlify and any of the other information that netlify has. It's gonna run a function server for me to test functions locally, and it's gonna spin all this up so that I can run this and live edit and see my changes as I work. Okay, let me get to my second tip, which is starters. And you may be like, oh, every library and every tool generally includes some kind of starters. What's so special about that? But the Jamstack community has hundreds, if not thousands, of starters that cover a wide range of tools and resources and just about anything you can connect to. And they're all really well done in a way that gets you a long way towards a complete application. So oftentimes you can use a starter and get everything, all the connections you need and all the code you need. And all you need to do is some customization and maybe some design, and you can launch a project in under an hour. let's look at Next.js. Next.js is one of my favorite frameworks for building Jamstack sites. It can do both Jamstack sites, so it can serve as a static site generator, and it can do SSR, which is server-side rendered sites, or it can do a combination of the two, which makes it really, really interesting and really unique. It's React-based, but even if you don't know React, it's actually relatively easy to learn because it simplifies a lot of things about React. At least that's my opinion. But it has a great list of starters here. So if you look at this, go to their GitHub library and you go to examples, all of these are starters for using Next.js. So let's say if I wanted to use, let's see, Tailwind CSS, which is really popular. They have a couple of examples with Tailwind here using Tailwind CSS. So I could go and let me create a little project here. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to create project name Tailwind Next. Tailwind Next. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use their Create Next app. So I'm going to go Create Next app. I'm going to create it right in here, and I'm going to I'm going to use -- example, and the example here was with Tailwind CSS. With Tailwind CSS. So it's going to create my project for me. It's going to pull in all the assets I need to be able to use Tailwind CSS with Next.js, and then I can start right out the box with that code integrated. As I'm not going to wait for that here because it's going to take a little bit to run and deploy, but as you can see, there are hundreds of examples using Next.js. Gatsby is another React-based framework for the Jamstack, and as you can see, they have hundreds of starters as well, using just about anything you could want. You can even filter it. So if I want to use Kentico content, for example, I can click here, and here are ones that use Kentico content. There's a ton of them here. They give you a great head start on building any kind of application that you want. There's all different categories of applications, all different categories of connections, and so on. You can also, if you're going to use, like, say, a headless CMS, a lot of these headless CMSs actually include starters that allow you to get started with them using static site generators to deploy Jamstack sites. Agility has a bunch of them. This one is one of them using Eleventy. And this will get you a starter blog that actually is built with Eleventy, but connected to Agility CMS as a headless CMS, and that connection's already there. I'm only using Agility as an example, but pretty much if you use any of the Sanity or Contentful or whatever, they have examples like this that'll help you get that head start to building the application with those connections built in. But the final one I want to show you is something called StackBit. StackBit is a tool for creating and generating Jamstack sites, and it gives you a great head start. So let me create a new project here. As you can see, they give you a bunch of different templates based on different types of sites. You've got documentation sites, e-commerce sites. I'm going to do this SAS, Software as a Service theme here. You can then click that, and I can choose a different static site generator. So I can choose between Gatsby, Hugo, Jekyll, or Next. Let's just go ahead and use Next again. I can choose what headless CMS I want to use, so Sandy, Contentful, or Git-based CMS if I want to use some of their more advanced features, or I can even choose some of these others as well. I'm going to go ahead and use Git, which stores the content in my Git repository. I'm already connected to my GitHub account here, so I can just click Create Site. And what this is doing is it's actually going out. It is creating the site for me with that template, using the static site generator that I chose, connected to the headless CMS that I chose, pushing that code to GitHub for me. So it's in my own GitHub repository. I don't have to use StackBit services after that fact. They offer some inline editing services, which you'll see when this pops up live in a moment. But I don't have to use them. I'm not tied to StackBit in any way. The code is in my Git repository, and it's then deployed to my netlify account. So it's already launched. So I have full ownership of everything. If I want to use StackBit services after that fact, I can, but I don't have to. And I've got the full code for a CMS-based Jamstack site. So you can click it here. Here's my site. It's going to load up their little editor thing in a moment here, and then I can actually click here and start editing. But if you want, I can go here and, well, the live site is still deploying, so I can't access the live site just yet, but there we go. All right, there's my live site. This is deployed to Netlify right now, so all of that I did in just a matter of minutes, so I can edit content here. Or I can go into my Git repository and start editing the content via the code right away, customizing the layout, and so on and so forth. So it's a great way to get started quickly in the Jamstack. Okay, let's get to my final tip here, and that is about serverless functions. So in almost any Jamstack application, you're going to need to do some kind of serverless functions for things like pulling content or managing authentication, or even just as a middleman to protect your API keys as you call an API that you have a protected API key for. The good news is that pretty much any of the Jamstack deployment options offer functions. Netlify offers them, Versal offers them. Gatsby Cloud recently launched them as well. And what they do is it makes it really easy to build, test, and deploy the serverless functions that you need to run your application as you develop your Jamstack application locally. So let's take a look at how that works. I've got a little project here. It's a very simple project. This is a Hugo-based site, but I've created a simple function just for the sake of testing. To be able to deploy these in Netlify, all I have to do is create a folder named Netlify, and inside that folder, a folder named Functions, and then I put my JavaScript files. These will automatically, as I push them out to Netlify, Netlify will see them, and it will deploy them to AWS Lambda for you and make those available to your application. So I don't have to separately deploy things to AWS or Azure or wherever I need to deploy them to. I can deploy it as a single entity in my Jamstack application and have that pushed out to AWS for me. So in this case, I've created a very, very simple function that just returns some JSON. And I'm going to show you how this works in terms of local testing. As you might remember before, we learned that Netlify dev will automatically launch a functions folder. So let me run Netlify dev here, and that's going to actually go ahead and launch my site locally. Again, this is a very simple site as an example, but I want to test that function. So I'm going to call my local host, and I do .netlify/functions, which is where the functions are living. And then the name of that function, if you saw, was just called fetch. So I'm going to go ahead and call that. And as you can see, it returned me data, but this is running locally. Obviously, once I push this out to Netlify, I can then call it on Netlify. But it's great to be able to do this local testing of functions and then push those out and have that automatically deployed, and then you can use those functions in your deployed application. So let me show you how this works in Next.js as another example. In Next.js, I only have to put files in this my pages folder, which is kind of a default folder within Next.js, and then API, and anything I put in this API folder is now available as a function within my Next.js application. And if I deploy it to Vercel, who makes Next.js after all, or even to Netlify, it will automatically deploy these as serverless functions for me. So as you can see here, I'm calling the IP API, and I have a protected key. So this one is very, very simple function that only just serves as protecting my key and making that call to the IP API to get the user's IP address. But then I have other ones, as you can see here, that handle authentication using Auth0. So these are automatically deployed for me as part of my Next.js application. I don't have to do anything special other than just put them in the proper place and then deploy them. Okay, that's it for my tips and my time. If you need to contact me, if you have any questions, I'm at RemoteSynth on Twitter, or you can contact me at brian@stepsend.com. Thank you for your time and thanks for listening.